The city was a canvas of muted grays and rain-slicked neon when I first saw her. Not dramatically, across a crowded room, but quietly, tucked away in the back of the university's rare books library, tracing the spine of an ancient, leather-bound volume. Her name was Elara. It fit her perfectly, ethereal, a little melodramatic, like a character from the very books she revered. I was a PhD student, drowning in the dry dust of historical archives. She, an undergraduate with eyes that held the depth of untold oceans and a penchant for poetry that bled into every conversation. Our initial interactions were a slow burn, fueled by shared silence and whispered literary references. We'd stay until the custodial staff ushered us out, talking about everything and nothing: the tragic beauty of Gatsby's delusion, the gnawing anxiety of Prufrock, the absurdity of our own futures. The first time I touched her, it was an accident. We were reaching for the same worn copy of Yeats, and my fingers brushed the back of her hand. The shock that jolted through me was electric, a sudden, blinding flash that banished the gloom of the library. She pulled back instantly, not in repulsion, but in a startled, almost fearful gasp, her cheeks flushing a deep rose. "Sorry," she murmured, her voice barely audible. She didn't look at me, but at the ground. That was the first hint of the shadow that would eventually consume us. Elara was a creature of intense light, but she carried a profound, invisible weight. She was guarded, her past a fortress of unspoken grief. She'd laugh easily, a bright, crystalline sound, only to have a moment later her eyes darken, becoming utterly remote, as if gazing into a distant, private hell. Our relationship was built on a thrilling, dangerous premise. I was the relentless excavator, determined to unearth her hidden self, and she was the beautiful, heartbreaking secret, terrified of being fully seen. The intensity, the sheer emotional velocity of our connection was unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't just love, it was an obsession, a desperate need to stitch her fractured soul back together with my own unwavering affection. We moved into a tiny, sun-drenched apartment above a noisy bakery. Our life became a cycle of intoxicating highs, late-night talks fueled by cheap wine and ambitious dreams, passionate arguments over philosophy, and the quiet, breathtaking intimacy of waking up beside her, followed by inexplicable, terrifying lows. Sometimes, mid-sentence, she would simply shut down. The light would go out. She'd become unresponsive, cold, a statue carved from beautiful indifference. The worst night was after my thesis defense. I was elated, on the precipice of my future, pouring champagne, telling her we could finally travel, finally start our real life. She stood by the window, not celebratory, but distant. "This is going too fast, Liam," she said, her back still to me. The simple words felt like a physical blow. "What is?" I asked, the champagne flute suddenly heavy in my hand. She turned then, her face a mask of agony. "All of it, us. I can't promise you a future. You deserve someone whole, someone who can stay." "I don't want someone whole, Elara," I pleaded, stepping toward her. "I want you. Broken or not, you are my entire world." "What are you not telling me?" But she only shook her head, tears finally tracking paths down her cheeks, a silent, terrible refusal. The air in the room thickened, suffocating us both in the unspoken truth that something was catastrophically wrong, something she held tight, that was far bigger than our love, and that was already starting to tear our world apart. The confession never came. Instead of an explanation, I got distance. After that night, the walls Elara had built around herself became impenetrable, crafted from a heartbreaking mixture of guilt and self-preservation. Our apartment, once a haven of shared dreams, morphed into a beautifully furnished cage. We moved through our days like polite strangers sharing a mortgage, her laughter a forced, brittle sound, mine a strained attempt at normalcy. I tried everything. I cooked her favorite meals, ignoring the way she'd push the food around the plate, barely eating. I left her notes, poems, and inside jokes stuck into the books she was reading, only to find them later, untouched. I even booked a spontaneous weekend trip to the coast, hoping the sea air and a change of scenery would loosen the terrible knot tightening around her soul. She refused, her excuse thin and sharp. I have to catch up on some reading. My desperation escalated into a dark, consuming obsession. I became a detective in my own relationship. I started watching her. When she left for the library, I'd wait 5 minutes and follow, only to find her sitting exactly where she said she'd be, surrounded by stacks of books, a picture of studious innocence. Yet, the feeling persisted, the certainty that she was seeing someone, doing something, or hiding some deep, life-altering secret. One Tuesday, I noticed a subtle inconsistency. She came home late, claiming a long seminar, but the collar of her favorite trench coat was turned up, and a faint, unmistakable scent of cedar and expensive pipe tobacco clung to the wool. Elara never smoked, and neither did anyone in her small circle of literary friends. I knew that smell. It was the scent of the dusty, exclusive private scholars' club downtown, a place she had always dismissed as pretentious and stuffy. The betrayal, I realized, wasn't necessarily romantic, but it was far worse, a systematic, calculated deception about how she spent her time. That evening, the facade cracked completely. We were sitting in strained silence when my phone buzzed with an automated reminder. It was her birthday next week. I need to know what you want for your birthday. I pressed, trying to sound casual, but my voice was tight with suspicion. She looked up, her expression a mixture of panic and deep sadness. Liam, please, don't make a fuss this year. I'd rather just ignore it. Ignore it. Elara, that's absurd. It's your 30th. We need to celebrate. I insisted, crossing the room to stand over her. I needed an answer, a confirmation, anything to pierce the suffocating veil of secrecy. She finally broke, pushing herself away from the table with such violence that her chair scraped across the floor. You don't understand. You never understood, she cried, her voice rising to a raw, painful shriek. I don't get to have a normal birthday, a normal life, a normal future with you. Stop trying to force it. Before I could respond, she grabbed her keys, threw on that cursed trench coat, and fled the apartment. I didn't follow her this time. I was paralyzed, left standing in the silence that felt heavier than 1,000 words. The weight of her suffering finally felt real, physical, something I could reach out and touch. In that moment of absolute despair, I made a reckless, defining choice. I went straight to her desk, tearing through drawers until I found what I was looking for, a small, personalized, leather-bound diary she never let me touch. I rationalized it as survival. It felt exactly like self-destruction. I opened it to the last entry, the paper still slightly damp from ink. The entry was dated 3 days ago. It wasn't about another man. It was about an address, a time, and 3 terrifying words written in shaky script. The appointment, Tuesday, asterisk. The word Tuesday was burned into the diary page like a brand. I didn't close the journal immediately. My conscience screamed with self-disgust. I had crossed the boundary of trust, the boundary of privacy she guarded so carefully. But my fear was louder. I desperately flipped through the preceding pages. There were no names of lovers, no mentions of another city or a new life, only emotional chaos, notes about unbearable pain, about medication that doesn't help, and a constant, aching feeling that she was stealing my time by staying with me. I quickly jotted down the address listed next to the entry. The appointment. It wasn't a fancy clinic or a cozy cafe for secret meetings. It was an unassuming building on the city's outskirts, looking like an old research facility. Elara returned 4 hours later, exhausted and pale. She offered no apology and no explanation for her absence. She simply sat quietly on the sofa, hugging her knees. I know about Tuesday, I stated, unable to tolerate this charade any longer. My voice was hoarse with unched tears and anger. She didn't flinch. She simply looked up at me, her eyes holding no surprise or fury, only a dead weariness. It was the look of someone who had long since surrendered. What do you know? Liam, I know you're lying to me. You're lying about seminars, about library trips, about us being fine. I know something important is happening on Tuesday, and it's connected to this address. Is it another person? Another life? Something that is destroying you, Elara, and both of us. I was barely able to stop myself from yelling. "It's not another person," she whispered, and in that whisper was all her months of torment. "It's just my past. It's come back for me, and you can't change it." The following days devolved into the worst period of waiting in my life. I watched her like a guard watching a prisoner, trying to catch the smallest hint. Tuesday arrived. It was a gray, bleak morning, and the city seemed paralyzed in anticipation of a catastrophe. I invented an excuse to miss work and sat in my car a block from our apartment, waiting. At 10 o'clock, Elara emerged. She was wearing her long coat, her face almost bloodless. She hailed a cab, and when it pulled away, I followed, keeping a safe distance, my heart hammering in insane, uneven rhythm. The taxi took her directly to the building whose address I had seen in the diary. It was a complex surrounded by a high metal fence, with a sign, "Institute for Research in Chronic Diseases, Private Fund." No bright signs, no hint of welcome. The place radiated an air of medical secrecy and hopelessness. I parked further away and watched. Elara walked through the entrance without hesitation. This was not a place for romantic rendezvous. It was a place where people fight for their lives or come to terms with their loss. Suddenly, the whole mosaic snapped together into a single, terrifying picture. Her sudden detachment, her phrases about not being able to stay, her constant fatigue, her fear of the future, and even that scent of tobacco, which turned out to be the smell of some experimental medical compound. She wasn't cheating on me with another man. She was cheating on me with mortality. I felt my legs give out. I took a deep, shaky breath and realized I couldn't just wait in the car. If her secret was an illness, then my place was by her side. I turned off the engine, got out of the car, and headed toward the high metal fence, ready to burst into her sealed-off world and accept the part of the suffering she had so desperately tried to hide. I was ready to fight for her life, even if she had already accepted her defeat. I walked into the cold, silent lobby of the Institute, the heavy glass doors sealing the noise of the city behind me. The air smelled of disinfectant and sterile fear. A receptionist, whose eyes held a weary professional empathy, asked for my purpose. I swallowed hard, the name a lump in my throat. "I'm here for Elara Vance. I'm her partner." The receptionist paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "I'm sorry, sir. Patients here have strict privacy protocols. Please," I pleaded, leaning over the counter, dropping the last shreds of my dignity. "I know she's sick. I know she's hiding it. I just want to see her. I just want to be here." Perhaps it was the genuine desperation in my voice, or perhaps the staff here were simply accustomed to these breakdowns. She made a quick call, speaking in hushed, technical terms. After what felt like an eternity, she directed me to the third floor. Past rooms that hummed with unseen machinery, I found Elara not in a sterile white room, but in a small, slightly worn lounge area, staring out a window at a brick wall. She looked smaller, thinner, the light in her eyes replaced by a profound, heartbreaking resignation. She didn't turn when I approached, but she knew I was there. "You shouldn't have come, Liam," she said, her voice a fragile thread that threatened to break. I sat beside her, not touching her, letting the silence hold the weight of all the months of lies and denial. "Why didn't you tell me?" She finally turned, and the raw agony in her expression was more devastating than any physical pain. "Because I didn't want this for you. Look around. This is not the life you signed up for, not the one you deserve." The truth spilled out then, a torrent of crushing details. It wasn't cancer, but something far rarer and more cruelly persistent, a debilitating, chronic neurological condition that had lain dormant since her childhood, triggered recently by the stress of finishing her degree, of building a life, of loving me. She had started experimental treatments, the Tuesday appointments, which were physically taxing and offered only a precarious hope. The doctors gave me a timeline. "Liam," she whispered, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "They gave me a best-case scenario of 5 stable years. Then ... unpredictability." I watched my grandmother go through this. I saw how it destroyed her partner. I swore I wouldn't do that to the man I loved. I chose to push you away, to make you hate me, so that when the time came, it wouldn't hurt you so much. The betrayal I had felt suddenly dissolved, replaced by a seismic wave of guilt and overwhelming, agonizing love. All my suspicions of another man, all my selfish anger over her secrecy, felt pathetic and small. She hadn't been protecting a secret from me. She had been protecting me from her suffering. I finally reached for her, pulling her into my arms. Her body felt frail, but the fierce, familiar strength of her spirit was still there. You idiot, I choked out, tears finally streaming down my face, wetting her hair. You beautiful, idiotic, selfless woman. You are my life, Elara, and if we only have 5 years, then we will have the most brilliant, most breathtaking, most selfish 5 years the world has ever seen. You don't get to decide what I can handle. We sat there for a long time, the weight of the diagnosis pressing down on us, but our physical connection a desperate anchor. I felt the pain of her suffering, the terror of the timeline, but for the first time in months, the distance between us was gone. But even in this fragile reunion, a new, terrible realization dawned on me. Our love was no longer a beautiful, easy journey. It was a fierce, demanding battle.